Your party has run this country for a generation, and over that time, people's livelihoods have become less secure. There is less faith in our public services, and many people feel that our standing in the world has also been at question. Is this a better or a worse place to live than in 2010?
No, it's a better place to live than it was in 2010. Of course, I understand that the last few years have been difficult for everyone. We had a once-in-a-century pandemic, followed by a war in Ukraine that drove up everyone's bills, and of course that's been difficult for everybody.
It's definitely not a better place to live than in 2010. Maybe better for people who were investment bankers for Goldman Sachs, because that's what Rishi Sunak did, because he got loads of money off of the global financial crisis. Maybe a better world for him, not for everybody else. And you say, oh, well, it's tough because of COVID in Ukraine recently. And I'm just like, things also sucked before those things. All of the problems that we have are the result of the Conservative Party's austerity plan from 2010 to 2018. That is what has made this country a worse place to live. It's just, in that period specifically, it only affected poor people. But now it affects middle-class people, people with mortgages and people with pensions. And as those are the only people who matter electorally in society, now everybody's done this great noticing. The great noticing has occurred. Everybody now notices that the Conservative Party are terrible at governing, and are arseholes, and are also massively out of touch. And shit.
But we've also made progress in tackling those things. Inflation back to normal, the economy growing again, wages rising, energy bills set to fall again just next week, and now we're able to start cutting people's taxes to give them financial security. So yes, of course it's been difficult, but we are now on the right track with the prospect of more tax cuts to come to give people more financial security. And that's the key choice for people at this election, building on the progress that we've made.
You told the public, though, very plainly, judge us by our record, judge us by the effort that we've put in. And over the longer term, over a long 14 years, the country has become poorer by many measures, sicker by many measures, and by many measures, public services are worse. That is the record of successive Conservative administrations.
No, I just don't accept that, Laura. If let's take education. I think education is one of the most
Every time it's all about education. The thing is, the test scores may be good, but the schools have collapsing roofs, Rishi. And now you can't blame Osborne and Hammond for those ones. That was you, as Chancellor, very specifically, reducing the number of school retrofits from 400 down to 50. And that's why a bunch of schools had to close their doors on the first day of term, because children's lives are in danger. And of course, as Laura Kay has pointed out, basically everything else is worse. Everything else is worse in this country. Poorer, sicker, public services on their knees, councils going bust, council properties now owned by massive multinationals. But again, these are all things that don't affect people in his core voter base, or indeed people in the Conservative Party.
Powerful things any government can do to transform people's lives. During that 14 years, thanks to the reforms of the Conservative government, our school children are now the best readers in the Western world. 9 out of 10 schools are good or outstanding, a huge improvement compared to what we inherited. Those reforms were all opposed by the Labour Party. And you can see the contrast. If I could just finish answering your question. You can see the contrast very clearly, where Labour are in charge of education in Wales. You haven't seen that improvement. So I point to that as evidence of actually enormous progress in transforming the life chances, particularly, by the way, of the most disadvantaged children.
And those figures.
What's funny as well is I think it's good if they have educational attainment increasing in schools. That's great. But it won't improve their futures if there aren't good, high-paying jobs for them to go into, which we don't have because the Conservative government has failed to invest for 14 years because of their terrible economic policies, because of their catastrophic mismanagement of the economy. Graduate job levels are down. The graduate premium has decreased in the 14 years they've been in power. Wages have stagnated. We're 5 figures in terms of median wage lower than we otherwise would have been if we'd have continued with wage rises in the same way that we had leading up to 2010. So you could have the most educated children in the world. They'll still be working in an Amazon warehouse because you've cooked the labour market. You've cooked the economy. You've cooked the ability for people to be able to get good jobs by making sure that the gap between those who work and those who own has become wider and wider and wider because working people don't donate to your party.
Which we've heard many times from Conservative ministers in the last few weeks. The progress that has been made is, when you look at them closely, partly because other countries have fallen behind, not necessarily because primary school children in England have leapt ahead. But the sentiment in the country, I suppose, is what I'd like you to address this morning, because we don't want to trade statistics for 20 minutes. Our viewers, many of them get in touch with us every single week, expressing frustration, expressing sadness, not just about the pandemic and what's happened with the energy shock because of Ukraine, but about how they feel about our country. And I just want to put some of their comments to you, and I'd like you to address them directly. Julian has said, why isn't anything working in this country? It grieves me sorely to see the state this country has degenerated into. Michael's told us, why does my son's school not have enough money for glue sticks? Why do I have potholes on almost every road I drive on? Why can't I get a doctor's appointment? Why are beaches and rivers polluted beyond measure? And Sheila says, our biggest worry is not about tax, it's about having the basics.
The thing is these are all incredible quotes showing you what happens when you put right-wingers in charge of a nation's economy. And when you let the foxes inside the henhouse and they gorge on the morsels of public sector finance instead of using it to be able to build the country to what it could be, right? This shows you all of the terrible things that happen when you put Conservatives in power. I'm like, where were all of these statements being read out to George Osborne and David Cameron? Because again, as awful as Rishi Sunak is, and he is awful, he is a terrible human being in basically every single metric. I hate him, I think he's a disgusting rodent. But all of these things are not his fault. All of these things are the fault of David Cameron and George Osborne. Yet the same Economist, the same Financial Times, The Times, paper of record, all of these right-wing, centre-right, quote-unquote newspapers who backed Conservative austerity under Osborne and Cameron that have led to the public sector degeneration and war on the poor that has led to the point where we now look like a developing economy where child poverty has skyrocketed, absolute poverty has skyrocketed in this country, is because of their failed policies that all of these papers backed. And now they're all backing Keir Starmer and saying, wasn't it terrible how we didn't invest in infrastructure when bond yields were at zero? And I'm like, this is your fault. You all backed this.
You say to our viewers this morning that you can do anything about how they feel. Do you understand it?
Yes, of course I do. And my first answer to you, I acknowledge the frustration that people felt. Of course it's been very difficult. When inflation rises to the highest level that we've seen in decades, when energy bills double because of a war in Ukraine, of course that has an impact on Sheila and everyone else. And that's why I'm working so hard to deliver people financial security. And I do think it is about tax, because people are working very, very hard.
But if you reduce tax, you reduce public service provision, which is what these people rely on to get by. They are telling you public services don't work. And you're saying, screw spending money on public services. Here's money to spend on slightly more consumption, even though you don't have an NHS and your education sector is failing. Like, school roofs are collapsing. Like, people don't want tax cuts. People keep telling you they don't want them. They want public services to start working again. And this is what is such a dereliction of duty of our press, right? In that they didn't question Osborne and Cameron and Hammond and May when all of these things were happening. And as somebody points out in chat, when Jeremy Corbyn was doing the same thing in Prime Minister's Questions, bringing up the stories of people who would have their lives ruined through Conservative Party policy, through austerity, through policies for the rich and not for the many. He was laughed at, he was jeered at, he was treated again as not being an adult in the room throughout that period, not just by the Conservatives, but by the press and by his own parliamentary Labour Party. And at that point, there was no COVID, there was no war in Ukraine, there was no excuse the right wing can then throw up as a reason why all of these poor people having their lives ruined through policy. If they'd actually been questioned during that period by our press, by our sycophantic press, then maybe they would have a discussion over the failure of austerity. All the people who marched with the People's Assembly demanding there to be no cuts in the austerity period wouldn't have been treated like champagne socialist lefty protested, and would have been treated like actually what they were, immiserated people wanting to have a country that didn't think that they were worthless, for example. And now they're actually doing the hard yards of properly scrutinising this failure of policy. And Rishi Sunak can just go, COVID, war in Ukraine. And on top of that, this question's now only happening as soon as, again, homeowners and pensioners are feeling the pinch. Pension funds have dropped in value. Mortgage rates have gone up. Now there's a problem. There was a cost of living crisis from 2010 to 2018. It just only was for poor people. But they don't matter. They don't matter in Politico land. They're irrelevant. It's only the people who own mortgages and who have pensions who are relevant in political terms in this country. It's suddenly when journalists take notice when they're affected by it.
And I want them to be able to keep more of their money so that they can spend that on their families in the way that they want. And we've now been able to start doing that after a difficult few years, which is very positive. So everyone in work on average is receiving a £900 tax cut. And if we're re-elected, we will continue to cut taxes for people at every stage of their lives, giving them the financial security that they rightly want and deserve after what has been a difficult few years. And what I don't want, none of those things are going to be made any easier by a Labour government that would whack up everyone's taxes by thousands of pounds. That's not going to help Sheila or anybody else, and I don't want to see that happen.
But this is about what's changed over the long term. And Sheila says your government has just not been delivering the basics. People feel you've not delivered the basics, and you're asking for another 5 years.
Again, Laura, you said you didn't want to trade statistics, right?
I'm telling you what our viewers are telling us.
And this election is about the future, and if people want more...
Literally, he's literally being said, the people of this country, the people who pay your bills, Rishi, the people who you are literally paid to represent, right? We pay you to represent us. And he's brushing it away as if it's irrelevant. All these proles who I'm supposed to be governing over, lording over more like. I don't need to care about these people's opinions. This is about the future. Stop telling me about these sob stories from these poor people who I don't need to care about. This man's disgusting. He really is revolting. And it just shows you why everyone believes him to be out of touch. But again, like, you're saying this is a long-term problem, Laura. Where were these questions? Where were these questions 7 years ago? Where were these questions in 2015 and 2017 and 2019?
Financial security so that they can spend the money on the things that they want to provide a better life for their family. That's what I will deliver. We'll continue cutting taxes for everyone in work. We'll continue cutting taxes for those who are self-employed, setting up their own businesses, taking that risk. For young couples who want to buy their first home, we will abolish stamp duty effectively for first-time buyers. And for millions of pensioners who have worked hard all their lives, I want to make sure they have security in retirement. So they will have the triple lock plus, which will mean that we raise the allowance for pensioners. Again, that won't be matched by the Labour Party. So for the first time in our country's history, pensioners face paying a retirement tax on the state pension. And these are the choices that are ahead of people at this election, which is why it's so important.
On that particular issue, we pointed out to our viewers before, you're promising to undo something that the Conservatives were already planning to do. And our viewers also are very aware that taxes have been at an absolutely record level. So you may be promising that now, but people have really felt the pain because of successive tax rises that your party has brought in. And
can I just address that? Well, you've made the point. So let me just address that. We had a pandemic, right? And I was on your show many times talking about the support that we were providing to the NHS for the vaccine with furlough. Then we had a war in Ukraine. Again, I was on your show and you were saying, well, what support are you providing to people? At the time, not a single person disagreed with that support. Very understandably, we have to pay that back. That's why I took the difficult decisions that I did. I was upfront about it at the time. That's what leadership looks like. But now we are cutting taxes, undeniably cutting taxes for people. This election is about the future. I will continue to cut taxes for people, including pensioners. And you talk about the tax burden. Under the forecast by independent experts, the tax burden under a future Labour government is forecast to rise to the highest level in our nation's history. So if people are worried about, as you say, if people are, you've brought up the tax burden, if the tax burden is a question at this election, independent forecasts show that under Labour it will rise to the highest level in our country's history. So that's the...
People actually don't care. When surveyed on this, and if they're asked, would you rather tax cuts or public spending? They want to have public spending. They don't care about what the tax burden looks like overall as a percentage of the economy. Even under the Greens' plans, they would expand the tax base pretty much broadly, much more broadly than we currently have a tax base in this country by increasing capital gains, having a wealth tax, changing the rules around national insurance. Our overall tax burden as a percentage of GDP would still be lower than France, still be lower than Germany, still be lower than Greece, still be lower than Italy, still be lower than Finland, lower than Sweden, lower than Denmark, lower than Norway. This idea that somehow the fact that we have a record high tax burden in this country, relative to the rest of Europe, it's normal. It's like a normal tax burden. And people seem to think that we can have like American-style taxes and European-style public services, and it's newsflash, you just can't. You can't have both of these things at the same time.
A choice. If taxes are an issue that people are concerned about, they will go up under the Labour Party, they will go down under the Conservatives.
And I will say to you, Prime Minister, the same as I've said to every politician during this campaign, is our voters have been very clear with us. They want our politicians to answer questions about their plans and their policy rather than trying to attack the other side, which is understandable as a politician, but I'll say the same to you as I have to every other politician.
I think it's reasonable to point out the difference in the choice.
And you've done that. When it comes, though, to your statement, as you've repeatedly said, that elections are about the future, Of course they're about the future, but they are also about your record and your party's long-term record. You had a successful career in business before you became a politician. I don't think you'd have hired anybody without checking out their references or looking at their CV.
Yes, and I've been Prime Minister for 18 months. And during that time, inflation has come down, as I said it would, from 11% back to target. The economy is growing faster than our competitors. Wages are rising, energy bills are falling, taxes are being cut. My primary job when I took on this role was to deliver that economic stability. We have done that, and that's why people can trust that we will continue to cut their taxes and give them the financial security that they crave. But also, in that 18 months, we've made important strides in investing more in our security, because the world is a more dangerous place than it ever has been.
And we're going to come on to that in a second.
There's a choice. OK, well, I'm happy to talk about that.
We're going to come on to that in a second. We were just talking to Pat McFadden from the Labour Party about their position on defence, and we'll come to that in a second. And another promise that seems to have gone by the wayside is the kind of bold commitment that your old boss, Boris Johnson, used to make when it comes to climate change. Now, at your party's conference this year, you shifted tack and you shifted the rhetoric. But some people believe, including the Independent Climate Change Committee, it means that the UK's lost its status as a leader. Was that a mistake?
No, and actually, you started that question with something that I fundamentally disagree with. Because of Brexit, we've lost our standing in the world.
That's not what I said. I said there's lots of economic evidence, which is true. There are many economists who say...
You said we've lost our standing in the world. That is completely and utterly wrong.
Well, that's not what I said, Prime Minister.
We've just had a visit from the Japanese. Last year, we signed the Hiroshima Accords with Japan, unequivocally Japan stating that we are their closest ally in Europe. We're building a new generation of nuclear submarines with Australia and America. Never happened before that we have shared technology on that scale. We've negotiated the Windsor Framework with the EU, restored government in Northern Ireland, joined the CPTPP trade deal, and we are leading the world and leading in NATO when it comes to supporting Ukraine, investing more in defence, standing tall with our allies. People are queuing up to work with us because they respect what we do. So I just completely reject that. It's entirely wrong, this kind of declinist narrative that people have of the UK. I've wholeheartedly...
I mean, but it's declining in terms of what the life is like for normal people. It shows how out of touch he is, that what he believes to be Britain's standing in the world, or the reversing of Britain's decline, is something nebulous that looks good for the statesman who does those things, rather than the material conditions that actually regular people in Britain have to deal with. I don't want the UK to be embarrassing on the global stage, chat. I really don't. I don't want us to be embarrassed. But I'm far more embarrassed. I think people are more embarrassed. I think that the rest of the world takes more pity on us to look at us being this absolutely declining, poverty-stricken dump than whether or not we're in a trade agreement or whether or not that we look good in terms of geopolitics. And in fact, globally, we look really bad in terms of geopolitics right now, specifically because we are currently providing diplomatic cover to a country committing ethnic cleansing and war crimes on everybody to see globally. We're one of the last few countries to properly try and put the foot down with regard to what Israel's doing. Do you think that makes us look good on a global stage, Rishi? Thought not.
But when it comes to climate change,
I'm very happy to talk about climate change.
There are people in your own party, some people who resigned over it, who say that the decisions that you made to shift the approach on climate change has caused the UK's reputation in that area, which was world leading, to fall back.
No, I don't think British families should solve a global problem all by themselves. We've decarbonised faster than any major economy. So we've cut emissions in our country by 50%. What have they done in the EU? 30%. What have they done in the US? 0. What have they done in China? Well, they're up 2 or 3 times. So where's the lack of leadership there? Look at our 2030 targets. Again, more ambitious than the EU, more ambitious than Japan, more ambitious than America. All this nonsense that we're not leading in the world. We're doing far more than anyone else, which is why I made the changes I did. Because I don't think it's right to saddle British families with thousands of pounds of extra costs to switch out their car, their boiler, convert their home when we
do more subsidy then, rather than scrapping it and make us pay more in the long term for ever-increasing prices for fossil fuels. How about you help us subsidise the transition towards cleaner and cheaper bills through insulation, for example? How about you subsidise these things and then it'll be cheaper for everybody? But no, you want us to spend more money in the long term, or we're going to saddle you with a cost. Well, you could just subsidise it rather than scrapping it.
We don't need to do that. No one else is doing that. I think that is the practical, sensible thing to do.
But it is having practical effects. Listen, the boss of Stellantis, who makes Vauxhall, Citroën and Peugeot cars, they're talking about pulling out of UK production because of the delay on making electric vehicles compulsory. The boss said this week, we've undertaken big investments, but if this market becomes hostile, we'll look at producing elsewhere. Well, hang on. We've seen billions of pounds of investment into our auto industry from...
Look at that face face that he did. Hang on a minute. Let me get a close-up of this face that he did.
Swear.
Well, hang on. We've seen billions.
Look at that. This is the face of a man, right? This is the face of a man who's never been told no in his life, who's never been disagreed with in his life, who's always been treated like mummy special boy. And then suddenly he's being questioned about his failures and the Conservative Party's failures in managing this country. And I can't believe you did something bad. Everyone go and try and do that face. Someone try and make an ASCII out of it. Actually, that would be an excellent emoji if it wasn't going to be completely irrelevant in 5 days' time. If it wasn't going to be completely irrelevant in 5 days' time, we would definitely turn this into an emo. Never held to account. Yeah, like, how dare you? How dare you question me? The private school scowl growl. Exactly. Literally. Well, no, yeah, not working class friends.
Of pounds of investment into our auto industry from Nissan into Sunderland, where I was at the plant, making a new generation of electric vehicles there, and from JLR, again, making their new platform of electric vehicles and gigafactories. Again, this kind of declinist narrative is total nonsense.
We've attracted this is a senior business figure expressing hesitation because of your decisions.
Well, what you haven't mentioned, though, is our two largest auto companies in the UK, both under our leadership in the last 6 to 8 months, have announced billions of pounds more investment, securing the future of their plants in this country and making the transition to electric vehicles. Well, you've picked one quote when the two largest producers of cars in our country are investing more.
It's the bottom 3 big car companies.
Right,
I want to move on to talk about another
JLR and Nissan are our two biggest car manufacturers in this country. They're both investing billions and said the future of electric vehicles are happening here in this country. But look, to your point, right, I don't think we need to saddle British families with thousands of pounds of extra costs when other countries aren't doing anywhere near the same thing, and it's not necessary. Now, that's a clear choice for people at this election, right? They may not like that, but I don't think it's right. It costs £10,000 in a typical terrace house to change your boiler. It costs £8,000 in a typical semi-detached house to convert your energy. And again, to change your car years before anyone is saying that is necessary, I don't think it's right. So yes, I did make those changes. They will all be reversed under a future Labour government, and that's a choice for people.
But you've also made a choice not to subsidise these things.
You just mentioned mistakes there, and we've been asking our politicians about mistakes this morning. When was the last time you were wrong?
Well, I talk to my wife and my daughters. They say on a regular basis. But this campaign is something that I am proud of, right? And that's what we're here to talk about.
After everything, you're proud of the campaign?
Yes, I am, because this campaign.
Sorry, I'm just gonna have a laugh at that one specifically. Really, Rishi? You're proud of the campaign after D-Day, after the betting scandals? Really? You proud of the campaign? Being laughed at on every single episode of Question Time? Are you pleased? Are you proud of all of that? Dream bigger, Rishi. Richer than the king. Surely you can dream to have a political campaign that isn't just like the worst political campaign ever. Like, it takes a lot to be worse than Boris Johnson and worse than Theresa May, and he's done it like twice over. We truly have breached the copium barrier. We have reached Mac copium at this point. Mac 69, should we call it? Have fun in California, Rishi. Bye-bye. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.